Welcome you back to our third lesson under the Educational Statistics Unit. I'm the facilitator of the unit, Dr. Ruth Inguri, and welcome this afternoon for our lesson number 3 on data presentation. I want us to begin by having a review of what we covered in our lesson number 2. We were able to look at the various definitions in terms of the data, the variables, and the measurements of scale. We also went ahead to explore the various types of data, where we categorize the data into the quantitative and qualitative, discrete and continuous data, and we also looked at the categorical data. We also went ahead to look at the various measurements of scale as we related them to the types of data, and we were able to come up with the 4 types of measurements of scale. That is the ordinal, the nominal, the ratio, and the interval scales. And finally, we ended up the lesson by looking at the various types of data using practical example provided from the educational sector. In our today's lesson, we are going to move away from the analysis of data, and we are going to look at the data presentation. When the data has been collected and has been analyzed, it must be presented in a meaningful manner. And we want to dwell on this lesson today as we look at the various types of data presentation. First of all, we are going to define data presentation by referring to it as a process of organizing data into tables, graphs, or charts, or also drawing conclusions on the data that is provided. We are going to be looking at data presentation in 3 ways. We are going to look at the textual data presentation procedures. We are also going to be looking at the tabular data presentation procedures, and we are also going to be looking at the graphical data presentation procedures. Before a researcher can utilize any of these data presentation procedures, it is important for them to understand that each of them have their own advantages and disadvantages, and therefore they should make that one take that one into consideration when it comes to the selection of which data presentation procedure they are going to be utilizing. We are going to begin by looking at the textual presentation. Under this one, we are going to look at the definition, the factors that are considered when it comes to utilizing the textual presentation. We are also going to be looking at the various types and the advantages and the disadvantages of this data presentation procedure. So what is textual presentation? This is where the data is presented in graph form, or data is written, or data is read. It is a combination of both the text and the figures. So we present the data in form of words, we present in form of sentences, and we also present data in form of paragraphs. Mostly, the type of data, moving back to what we have already covered, the quantitative and the qualitative data is going to orient itself heavily on the textual presentation. So, I provided an example here of textual presentation. I've talked about written, read, text, and also figures. And I've talked about sentences and paragraphs. If you look at this clearly, this is a paragraph because it's a combination of several sentences. We have a sentence that is reading from the first one to where we have the full stop, all the way to the end, making this one a paragraph. And then you can see we have the words. The words and the text is here, but you can also see a combination of the figures or the numbers. And I'm just going to read the first sentence. At the last count, 38 airlines were operating the Boeing 707s, the 720s, and the 727s over the world's airline. That is our sentence. And you can see there is a word, and you also have the figures. This is a good example of the textual presentation. So when it comes to selecting the textual presentation, what are some of the factors that we really need to put in play? The first one is the audience. Who is the person that is going to consume this textual presentation? Are they illiterate? Are they literate? What kind of language do they understand? Therefore, we must consider the language and how literate the person is for us to be able to use the textual. Because not all levels of textual presentation are going to be consumable by all the audiences out there. Then the next factor that we need to consider is we need to avoid the bias. Use of biased words, use of slanted words, emotional language. We need to avoid some of the words like the disabled. We normally call them the persons with disability. We need to avoid words like divorced because they have emotional language loaded in them. We also need to think about the accuracy. As you have seen from our example presented, there are figures and numbers. We really need to make sure that those numbers and figures are accurate, and even the information that is provided is accurate. We also need to avoid unnecessary details, because unnecessary details will provide monotony and ambiguity and will hinder the necessary details. Avoid the repetition, because this one again gives us monotony, and then it consumes a lot of time. We need to use short phrases. We shorten our sentences as much as possible and our paragraphs, mixing two phrases and combining them for them to make sense. We also need to avoid general description of words, things like too much, too little, exactly, always, never. All these words need to be avoided as much as possible in descriptive words. And then we also need to avoid the decorative language, the scholarly language that is supposed to be used in textual presentation, especially when it comes to the data analysis and presentation. So the text or the textual presentation, what are the advantages? The first one is that it allows the researcher to interpret data in an elaborate manner. A lot of description can be provided. It also allows for the researcher to present the qualitative data. I mentioned earlier that the educational statistics, the statistical measures are going to dwell so much on the quantitative data. So then, how do we present the qualitative data? It's going to be possible to do that using the textual presentation. It also helps the researcher to lay emphasis on the main points. The points can be repeated, the points can be put in bold for the emphasis. And it also helps to present small data or figures where the graphical or the tabular may not be possible. For example, if I want to present information like for simple data like there are 30 students in the class of 20 whom are girls, while 10 are boys, it is easier to understand this through textual presentation than graphical or tabular presentation. So what are the disadvantages? I want you to imagine a book a written book, I want you to imagine a thesis or a project report that has been written, a minimum of maybe 50,000 words or 350 pages. And one is supposed to read that information and make interpretation and draw conclusions. So what are some of the disadvantages of the textual presentation? One, it produces extensive data in form of words and paragraph, which may be difficult for the reader to draw conclusion in a glance. For a table, I'll be able to look at a table and draw conclusions using just that one page. But in textual presentation, I will be required to read the 350 pages for me to be able to draw conclusion. The other disadvantage is that it's not suitable for large sets of data that have too many details. I've given an example in the previous one where you can use small sets of data, you can use textual presentation. But when it comes to the large amount of data, it is not going to be suitable using the textual presentation. So the textual presentation can also be very tedious, one, to write, and secondly, even to go through, for one to be able to understand and to comprehend the main points. So our next segment, we are going to move away from the textual, where we are using the words, the paragraphs, and the sentences. And we are going to move to the second method of data presentation, which is tabular data presentation. So what is the definition? This is a method of presenting data using the statistical tables, where we have columns and rows. So it is a systematic organization of data in columns and rows. This one facilitates the presentation of very large amount of data in a very attractive, very easy and organized manner. So what is a table? A table looks like that. A table looks like that. We have the columns. We have the various columns going down this way, and we have the rows moving this way. That is a table. You can see another example of a table provided here. And you can see a lot of roaded information here. So what are the components of a table that are critical in tabular data presentation? The first one, the numbering of the table. And the numbering of the table is normally found at the top. This table has a number 7.1. That is the numbering of the table. Then we have the name of that table. We have to mention what type of data is being presented in that table. That is the different parts of the table. That is the name of the table. And then we have what we call the sub here. This is the one that describes what is found in each of these columns. And then we have the caption as the other part of the table, which describes what is presented in each of these rows. And then at the bottom here, if that table is being drawn from a secondary source, we can see we need the source of that data. And in some of the formatting guides, they may also require the footnotes. And that's why all these 7 parts of the table are critical for data presentation using a tabular form of presentation. There are some general rules that must be adhered to when it comes to the tabular presentation. One of them is that the table should be very simple and very attractive. Remember, especially when it comes to the educational statistics, most of the statistics is going to be based on children, and a lot of attractiveness and color is provided. But they must be simple to understand, but also very attractive to leave the reader or the consumer glued to it. There has to be proper and clear headings for the columns and rows, and that is what we have called the stub, and that is also what we have called the caption. There must be, there can be approximation, especially where you have numbers that have decimal places, they can be rounded off. Then the unit of measurements must always be provided. What are we measuring? Are we measuring in kilograms? Are we measuring in kilometers? Are we measuring in whatever unit of measurement? That one must be defined very clearly. The observations that are large, they can be broken in several tables. You can have 2 or 3 tables in one table. But thick lines should be provided where we are separating the data from various types of tables, especially when we have large classes. Tables, as present as they are, they also have some disadvantages. One, they lack the details. I mentioned the textual presentation, where I said the textual presentation can present a lot of details. And from the table that I have provided, you have seen very little detail can be provided in that table. So they lack the detail that can provide a detailed explanation that is normally provided in a textual presentation. They also lack the visual presentation. Like we are going to look at the graphical presentation later, they lack the visual presentation, which we normally have in the graphical presentation. They are also limited in use. Very little materials that can be provided in tabular form. And then they are non-descriptive in nature as we compare them to the textual presentation. Our next method of data presentation is the graphical data presentation, which is a presentation using the graphs and diagrams. So we are going to be using the graphs and diagrams. And there are various forms of data, graphical data presentation. We shall be looking at them like line graph, the bar graph, the pie chart. We are going to be looking at each one of them. But something to note is that the graphical presentation will allow the researchers to show the cause and effect of the relationship. What is the relationship between that math test taking time and the exam results? They will also allow us to show the changes in variables within time frame, time series, and frequency distribution. But there are some general rules that must be adhered to when it comes to the graphical presentation. One, there has to be a suitable table. As I mentioned earlier, the measurement of scale will be required. The proper scaling is mandatory. The indexing, especially the coloring, the shading, the lines, the designs also are required. And then the data source must be acknowledged, especially if the information is being drawn from secondary data. Then it must be kept simple and neat for it to be able to provide the information that is needed. Graphical presentation is very useful. One, it is very acceptable. It is readily acceptable as a form of data presentation in most of the fields. Then it allows for comparison, the causal and effect comparisons, and the comparisons of various variables. It is also less costly, like we are going to look at when it comes to the various graphical presentations that we are going to use. It enhances decision making, and it provides information in a logical manner. So what are some of the disadvantages of the graphical presentation? First of all, they are very costly in terms of time, and it's also in terms of materials. And because the colors must be depict the colors of the environment, they are also very costly in terms of the colors that are used. They are more time consuming, and they are also prone to errors and mistakes, especially when they are done in a hurry, especially when they are done in a hurry. They lack the secrecy because they display all the information as it appears. And then they have a problem understanding, especially the details. So let's explore the types of graphical presentation. One, we have a line graph, which is linear graphs used to display continuous data. Going back to the discrete and continuous data, you can see we are going to use the line graph for continuous data. And the line graphs, we have the vertical and we have the horizontal lines here, and then you can see the line graph is there. They are very useful in predicting the future events over time. As you look at the movement of this line graph, you can predict what is happening. Today we are having the COVID-19 results, and every single day there is prediction that is being done about what is going to happen. A line graph can be very, very useful in predicting the future. What are some of the advantages of the line graph? One, it shows the relationship between two or more variables, which is not possible using a table or possible using the textual presentation. It also provides the visual impression of the threads. You can see the threads, the push-ups, the roll-ups, you can see them very clearly. It can also show the positive or the negative threads, and it's simple to construct and to read. If you look at these lines, you can be able to read what is on the horizontal, the vertical here, and you can be able to read what is on this other side. So what are the disadvantages? Plotting too many bars may make it appear cluttered. So you can only present one information at a time. There is also a wide range of data that is difficult to read accurately. When you have a lot of data, you may not be able to present it graphically because it's going to be difficult to read. It becomes more complicated or uneven where you have uneven class intervals. And at times, when you have too many classes or too many data that you need to produce and many patterns, it may not be possible to use the line graph. Then we have the bar graph. You can see clearly here the bar graphs. These are the bars. Bar graph is used to display the category of data, and it compares the data using the solid bars. You can see the solid bars here to represent the quantities, and you can see each of the quantities are indicated here. So what are the advantages of the bar graph? They are able to show the frequencies. They also represent relative numbers and proportionate. And they can also summarize a lot of large data. But they are also difficult in that additional information may be required for the interpretation to be drawn from the bar graph. They also fail to expose the key assumptions and the causes and the impact. And they can easily be manipulated to give false information. Then we have the histogram, the graph that uses the bars to represent the frequency of numerical data. You can see they do the continuous data. You can see they are continuous. They are different from the bar graph because they are continuous. They are continuous by nature, and they also show the intervals. What are some of the advantages of the histogram? They are able to present large amounts of data. They can also show the relative frequency of occurrences in various data. And they can also help to predict the future performance in the process of teaching and learning or any other process. Then we have the disadvantages. It only It's only applicable in continuous data. In the event we have the category data or the discrete data, it may be difficult to use the histogram. They are also more difficult to compare between sets of data. Then the next one is the line graph or the line plot. You can see, shows the frequency of data given the number line. The X is placed above the number line. You can see now, like the 30 has occurred 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. 35 test score is having 4 students, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then that 8, 2 students. Then we have 43 students and such. And the X's are placed on top of each other to depict the frequency. That is the line plot. It enables us to look at the relationship between 2 or more variables. It gives us a very good visual. You can be able to see the visuals. And it can show the positive and negative values. But in case you have too many numbers, then it can be cluttered. It can provide clutter. If there is too much data and with wide range, then it can also be difficult. It can be difficult to construct, and it can also be complicated. And then we have the frequency table. The next one. The table shows the pieces of data that falls within the given interval range. You can see these are the scores, these are the tally, and these are the frequencies. If you count this, they will give you the frequencies. And we can say it is able to present a great amount of data, and it can show the outliers. And you can see the two here very quickly, and you can see the one that has higher. It's able to show the outliers of various types of data. But we also say it is very, very difficult to comprehend. One may require some additional information, and the tables can also be skewed, or they may also have the kurtosis affected by the kurtosis. Then the next one is a pie graph or the pie chart. And we can see very clearly the pie chart here. The circle is considered as 100% and is represented with specific percentages representing each of the occurrences. So we can say that this is easy to understand, and you can see it's very, very easy to understand. You can be able to tell what is in each of these pieces. It also enables comparison of data. You can be able to compare the large and the smaller amount of data, and it can also be manipulated to fit whatever the researcher wants to put there. We are also saying because of the ability to manipulate, it could also be manipulated as a disadvantage to give false information. But it also allows us to be able to compare several types of data. Then the next one is the stem. The next one is stem and leaf. And you can see very clearly here, the stems include the tens, and this one includes the ones. You can see very, very clearly, this is the stem and this is the leaf. We have the advantages. It can quickly organize information in a convenient manner, but it can also be very, very difficult to produce, and it may require some additional information. So as we come to the end of the lesson today, a lot of data is going to be collected and analyzed within education sector. It is paramount for us to understand the data presentation procedures and to understand the bearing they have on each of the statistical procedures that we shall be utilizing. Thank you. We come to the end of our lesson number 3. We shall be meeting in our lesson number 4.
These televised lectures supplement our robust online learning going on our MKU online platform. You can view more on our televised lectures via our online platform. We are in a digital era, and Mount Kenya University knows this. The following are the steps to follow so as to complete your online application. Download the application form from the website www.mku.ac.ke. Attach copies of your academic certificates and ID. Pay the application fees via M-Pesa pay bill number 270988. Your ID is the account number. 2,000 shillings is the charge for a postgraduate. You can also deposit in the bank accounts provided on the website. Then email all the above to apply@mku.ac.ke.